Good afternoon and welcome to today's Healthy Soil for Farmers Showcase. In today's showcase, we're going to be featuring some cotton producers from the great state of North Carolina. And we've kind of entitled this session, View from the Cotton Gin, because one of our presenters actually is a farmer and he's also operates a cotton gin there in Scotland Neck, North Carolina. Today, it's just a gorgeous spring day here in North Carolina. And I'm sure everybody that's participating in this would hopefully maybe sitting on your back porch and enjoying the spring weather, something we've just starting to get into. So anyway, the Healthy Soils for Sustainable or for Healthy Soil Farmers Showcase is a product of the Healthy Soils for Sustainable Cotton Project, which is a joint effort between the Soil Health Institute, and we're working in partnership with Wrangler Jeans and the Walmart Foundation. A lot of you may not know or have never really heard of the Soil Health Institute. We've been a not-for-profit group that's been around for about 5 or 6 years. And our sole mission is to safeguard and enhance the vitality and the productivity of soils through scientific research and advancement. And really what we're trying to do is help bring the science that's just becoming more and more relevant or aware of out about those things. When we talk about soil health, where's the science behind it? There's a lot of questions on that, and we're helping to bring that out through research and those types of things. Projects like this just don't happen. You know, it takes funding like this, and we're always appreciative of funding that we can get to help with the project through the Wrangler, the VF Foundation, and of course the Walmart Foundations are the ones who put the funding in to put this project together. It's been going on for about 3 years now. The two key objectives of the project are, one, to increase the adoption of soil health management systems by cotton producers across the South, across the Cotton Belt. We're focusing primarily on 6 states, mainly because of funding, and working with them, put on various training events, field days, that types of thing. Of course, with the COVID, we had to kind of cut out all the in-person sessions for the last year or so, but we're hoping maybe by the end of summer, we'll be able to get back and do some field days and that type of thing. And the second objective is to quantify the production environmental benefits. You know, what are those benefits, not only to the farmer through maybe economic benefits, but also to society as a whole through water quality and carbon sequestration and all those types of things. So we're working on methods to help do that. This is the 6th showcase that we've had. We started off in February 2nd in Mississippi, looking with what works and what doesn't there. We also had a presentation from producers in Texas, Arkansas, California, and then last week we were in Georgia talking with some cotton and peanut farmers there. We have 2 more sessions coming up, one next week from some producers in South Carolina, where they're going to be looking at lessons learned from 8 years or more of regenerative ag or implementing these soil health management systems. And then the last one's kind of interesting because we're bringing in some regenerative ag leaders across the country when we're looking at brands and someone from the Soil Health Institute and the Cotton Inc. and those type of people are going to come in and just have a general discussion about soil health and the role it plays in the future of U.S. cotton. I always like to start these showcases off, kind of set the stage, because really what we're trying to do is get producers to refocus and look at soils a little different. So our definition that we use of soil health, and hopefully by now folks are starting to pick this up, is the idea of a soil having the continuous capacity of the soil to function as a vital living ecosystem, and that sustains plants, animals, and humans. You know, we're looking at continuing capacity, that's sustainability. We're looking at that living ecosystem, trying to get beyond that chemical and structural component of soil, that the soil is actually made up for a biological component that is very necessary for food and fiber production. And they generate those functions that are necessary for us to grow crops. And it's always surprised me the amount of producers that really don't know exactly what their soils are supposed to do for them. You know, soils are a vital part of the nutrient cycle. The nitrogen, phosphorus, and potassium cycles are generated and function because of the biology in the soil. You know, most of the fertilizer we put out does not end up in that plant in that first year. So it has to go through these biological processes. We need soil to infiltrate and allow water to infiltrate and become available at those critical times of the year. Also, we want our soils to break down those products that we apply through bioremediation. Those organisms in the soil help to do that. And the big one here is we've got to be able to get the crop out. We expect our soils to be stable, to be able to cross the fields at those important times. We're during planting and harvest and those types of things. And how many fields are rutted up every fall because we've lost the ability to support agricultural equipment. And then the last two there, soil is habitat. I like to tell farmers they're no longer farmers, but they're habitat managers. Just like if we were to manage for quail or deer or something like that, every creature needs a food, they need water, and they need a place to live. They need to create that habitat. And you're creating that either positively or negatively by those management activities that you do. And 90% of these functions that I talk about is mediated or driven by those soil organisms, not just the microbes, but there are earthworms and pill bugs and all sorts of other organisms that are really intricate. You can see the two earthworms in the photo there. That's real common that you see that in healthy soils. How do these farmers are doing it? Well, when you listen to Zeb and when you're listening to Will and you're listening to Robbie, kind of listen to what these are the 4 principles that they're implementing. The idea that they're protecting the soil by minimizing their disturbance, and they're also maximizing the cover. Well, what does that do? Again, it creates a habitat for the diversity of organisms. It helps protect those soil aggregates that are so important to form pore spaces, allow water to infiltrate. And it also provides a source of organic matter. You need, in order to increase organic matter, you got to raise organic matter. It just doesn't happen overnight or without some kind of effort like that. And then the other 2 principles are maximizing living roots and maximizing diversity. We get sunlight. It's a beautiful day today. Photosynthesis taking place. If you have a cover crop or a living root growing in the ground or in the soil right now, you're getting those transfer of energy from the sun through the plant into the soil, feeding that biology. And then also diversity, whether it's adding crop rotations, including cover crops, or even as the picture here implies, maybe bringing some livestock back into the operation. That helps to drive the system. Provides a continuous input for carbon and energy and those types of things. It's really important. And one last thing before we begin our conversation, if you want to ask questions, you go down at the bottom. There's a Q&A button right in the center of your screen there. You can type in a note. You can do it anonymously or leave your name in there. That's fine. We're going to be answering questions as we go along. And so if you want to do that, make sure you do that. And the other thing I'll tell you, when we get done at the end, a survey is going to pop up. And if you would just take a few minutes and participate in that, that helps us gather information towards the success, or whether we hit the mark or not, what you're looking for as far as this type of educational opportunity, and also give us some ideas about future presentations that would be good to participate in down the road. So with that, I want to introduce our panel today, if you will. I got Will Mann used to be with the Fishing Creek Soil and Water Conservation District. Will's out on his own now since January, and he's working with producers still there in Halifax County, North Carolina. Will brings, I think, 20 plus years experience working with soil health. We also have Zeb Winslow, who's going to be one of our producers, and Zeb is going to go through his operation, starting from cover crops to termination and planning and answering those things, questions about that. We also have Robbie Waters, who is not only is he a farmer, but he also manages a cotton company there in Scotland Neck, North Carolina, a cotton gin. So he kind of brings a perspective, maybe a little more knowledge about the whole system of cotton production. And then we're going to conclude the session today with Archie Flanders, who's the Soil Health Institute's ag economist. Is actually did a kind of a partial budget analysis of Zeb's operation, and he's going to introduce that concept of cost and expenses and those types of things that are related to soil health. And so hopefully he'll be able to inform us about that. So with that, Will, I'm going to turn it over to you, and you kind of describe a little bit about what's happened there, how y'all got involved with soil health, what are some of the challenges, those types of things. So just go ahead and take it over there, Will.
Okay. Thank you, David, and thank you for the opportunity to speak today. I'm from here in Halifax County, North Carolina. We're in the northeastern part of the state. There's approximately about 733 square miles in our county. We have about 110,000 acres of cropland in Halifax County. Halifax is my home county. I've lived here all my life. A little bit about my background. I've been in ag sales for 20 plus years. I was with the local soil and water district, and now working to represent some private farmers here in this part of the state. As far as Halifax, our two main commodities are cotton and peanuts. And of course, we trade off with a neighboring county every year regarding peanut acreage, and our number one commodity is cotton. One of the things that initially got us into the strip till or no till situation was the highly erodible land requirements of the 1985 Farm Bill and the Food Security Act. Where we're located at geographically in the northeastern part of the state, we're in a transition zone between the coastal plain and Piedmont. With that, we've got landscapes that go from 2% up to 15 to 20%. So about 65% of our land is what is classified as highly erodible. Early on, we looked at conservation tillage and cover crops from strictly an erosion control standpoint, because structural practices such as grass waterways and parallel terraces would not be applicable in all scenarios as far as our topography and also the cropping system and equipment size. So we had to look for some alternatives. Early on, we had some producers back in the early 70s that adopted some no-till practices. Many of them were doing it were dairy farmers of all things. They were integrating it for forage production, mainly corn silage, alfalfa, and different grass forage rotations. By the late 80s, early 90s, we started looking at cotton. We had a group of farmers that left this county and went down to southeast and southwest Georgia, as well as Alabama, looking at some of the strip till practices that were done early on at that point in time. Back in the late 80s, early 90s timeframe, NRCS had a conservation agronomist who was employed at the time. That was a really momentum, so to speak, with a lot of producers in Eastern North Carolina. They got them interested, got an initiative, and also brought about different speakers, whether we traveled to see them or bringing them here to North Carolina. That man was very instrumental in getting us to adopt a lot of these practices. And locally, Halifax County, we're fortunate. We've got some great farmers that have always kind of took it upon themselves to be very innovative as far as integrating different tillage practices, adaptations to farm equipment, and implementations of cover crops. You know, one of the things we looked at from a soil health, but obviously erosion was the first thing. The next thing was subsurface compaction. We were ripping a lot of land back in, say, 25, 30 years ago. We're still doing it on a limited amount, but we're understanding. We're using tools such as cover crops. We're also using the more traditional ways of measuring soil compaction with tools such as a penetrometer. And the greatest tool, I guess, is a farmer's footprints in his own field to see what's going on. And folks, we have as large a farmers as anybody. We have farmers in Halifax County from 200 acres to 25,000 acres and everything in between. I told someone last week, we grow every commodity that's grown in North Carolina besides Christmas trees. We have every type of livestock except for turkeys, and we shut down our last dairy 2 years ago. But we've got beef cattle, we've got chickens, we've got hogs, we've got folks that have goats and sheep on small scale. So we've got everything, and we've got a lot going on. Our field sizes range from 2 acres to about 150 acres is the largest field. So some of our bigger farmers, there's a lot of road miles in between. So we have a lot of, and within our county, we'll see in a growing season a variability of 8 inches of rainfall on average difference. So we've got a lot of scenarios that stacked against us. You know, we've got soils like a lot in eastern North Carolina that have subsurface drainage problems. We've got in the western part of the county, we've got soils that we have a difficult time keeping together and keeping from eroding. So we've got all kinds of scenarios. And well, all this, yes, sir.
Let me, a couple questions come in. Let me ask you here, you said you got into the conservation tillage of strip till mainly for erosion and compaction.
Yes, sir.
What is it about running a subsoiler that doesn't keep compaction away? It seems like you rip it, you stay away, you know. Why is that not a good way to eliminate it completely?
One of the things that we have seen here locally, and there's some science that backs it up from different parts of the United States we've looked at, because of where we are transitionally geographically, some of our clays in our subsurface areas are so dense that yes, you can manipulate it with machinery, but it's only a temporary fix. It's that living root, that biological structure that adds the porosity that we're desiring for our soils. Because a lot of us in the coastal plain of North Carolina, we have some silt loams here that are very dense. We have some silt loams in our county, and this isn't subsurface, folks, this is surface, that our infiltration rate is less than 1/10 of an inch per hour. Actually, the water is evaporating quicker than it infiltrates. And you know, we can manipulate it with rippers and all, but it's just a temporary fix. And when we talk about a commodity such as cotton, those that are familiar with how cotton needs to be planted, that seed basically needs to be within the top 1/2 inch. And you know, you get in a scenario where those silt loams or clay loams are sticky and wet, that cotton seed might not have perfect closure. And all seeds, regardless of its depth, it has to have some sort seed to soil contact. And when you have a large void there, it's tough. And then when you partner a silt loam with a high water table, a seasonal high water table, when you go in and you rip, basically it's just like finishing the surface of concrete. You have basically molded that ripper trench where you're going to have some sidewall compaction. All these things we've learned by the hard way. And you know, it almost to be, if, and I tell farmers all the time, if you're going to do any ripping, please do it on a prescribed basis. Now, I know, you know, for us, for example, we've got some fields that you'll go across 3 soil types in 1 row pattern. And I know that there's a lot of variability. You kind of shoot in the middle and do the best you can. And that's all we all can do.
Yeah,
but the covers have been a real blessing for us.
So what point did you bring, you discovered that no-till or strip-till wasn't solving this problem? When did you bring the cover crops in, and what type of cover crops were you using to help address the erosion and ultimately the compaction too? Well, there's a lot in one question here. Well, and have you changed your mind as to what cover crops do the best for this type of thing to eliminate compaction and erosion?
Absolutely. We looked at a lot of different things. Probably your first question regarding why we need cover crops. We've got some farmers here in the county that are straight no-till guys, just a coulter and a double disc opener on a planter. And they've done a good job, and they've been at it for 10+ years now, but they don't use any covers. And what we're seeing with just crop residues, because here in the humidity of the Southeast, we've got a lot of cycling of those residues. So this time of the year, other than maybe some winter annuals, we don't have a whole lot of ground cover. You have a soil that's highly functioning, highly cycling, and you know, where you don't have that porosity in there because of living roots, you'll have some runoff issues. And we're seeing some runoff with no-till. So, you know, just because you're parking your tillage equipment doesn't necessarily mean that you're going to eliminate your erosion control.
Okay.
As far as covers is concerned, we started like many with just a small grain. Typically, we began with a wheat. Cereal rye was popular here for many years because we've got a lot of cow-calf operators in this part of the world, and we had people that would sow a cereal rye cover, put up some type of temporary fencing, and glean their fields with cattle in the winter. And look, we glean peanut fields, corn fields, cotton fields, tobacco fields, whatever. Whether it would be disced in and incorporated to cover, or we put the cover on with a drill or broadcast sometime at harvest. You know, and one of the things that we saw, and I saw this early on about 20 years ago in my journeys to Georgia, as well as Alabama, around the Auburn area, and also up into Pennsylvania, where guys were starting to use diversified covers. We saw a lot of legumes back then, crimson clover primarily, vetch. Back then, we didn't see a lot of brassicas as far as turnips, rapes, canolas, that sort of thing. Of course, all that's come on to play now. But when we started seeing these mixed covers, we started to understand some of the advantages. You know, it's like I tell folks, if we had 10 farmers in a room and asked them what covers work best for them, or what they would desire out of a cover crop mixture, out of that 10, you would probably get a different response from every one of them. But then again, you would probably get some similarities in the responses. So, you know, to say that one particular mixture works for everybody, that would be a difficult thing to say, because some of the guys that have cattle, for example, they would really like to have some legumes in it. But my guys that are just cotton and soybeans, having something that's going to alleviate some compaction, maybe cycle some nutrients, maybe even provide a little bit of nitrogen. And the other thing is weed control. You know, when I was in ag sales in the mid 90s, I was one of the first farmers in North Carolina to sell a GMO soybean. And, you know, back then, they were almost going to be used, or what we deemed as to be used on a prescribed basis. I don't know that anybody ever thought that they would be used as widely, or if we had gotten so far down the road with GMO crops as we are now. And what I meant by saying all that is we got ourselves in a pinch as far as herbicide resistance in these weeds. And that is something that won't go away. I think that there's some preventative measures that we can do. Fortunately, just east of us was the gentleman farmer that developed the Boll Weevil Eradication program that was adapted or adopted throughout the cotton belt all over the United States. I feel like at some point in time, those of us that are part of the cotton industry are going to have to adapt some of those same scenarios as far as monitoring and all on these herbicide resistant weeds. It's just gotten to the place that we don't have any other option. You know, chemistry, we're thankful for it. We're thankful for the researchers, but this is going to have to be a grassroots movement, whether it's a farmer paying attention to what's going on in his field or adopting a cover crop mix that's going to work best for him.
So you all have found by adopting cover crops, your resistant weed problems has gone down?
Yes, sir. Yes, sir. We have. And I think that some of the research that's come up throughout the cotton belt here in the Southeast will kind of back this up. You know, our workhorse in regards to cover crop is cereal rye. It does well for us because you can establish it just about any way you can get the seeds out there. It does well on a variety of soil types. It does well in a variety of soil conditions and fertility. And it really has the effects, primarily the allelopathy effects, as far as reducing weed pressure.
Well, let me get a comment from Zeb on that. Zeb, you know, you're using cover crops. Have you seen that and your weed pressure changed, have gone down? And then Robbie, I wouldn't mind having you follow up with that either, your response too. So go ahead, Zeb.
Yes, sir. I mean, we have, it's, you know, in the last 7 years, I guess, when we really started to push our cover crops and pay attention to them and just see how much we could get out of them, we've seen a tremendous decrease in our weed pressure, and also a decrease in our reliance on herbicides to deal with that weed pressure. I mean, we still use herbicides, just a lot less of them than we did before. We were using really heavy, really dense cover crops. That mat of cover that we're able to put on the ground just does a really good job of holding back weeds. It's not a silver bullet by any means. I mean, we still have some pigweed problems here and there, but it's stuff that we can go out and pull, or stuff that we can handle maybe with a little bit different chemistry than what we were doing before. So we'll have a few escapes throughout the year, but we have a lot less weed pressure, and we're able to handle that weed pressure with a lot less reliance on herbicides.
So have you changed how you spray? Has that changed any, but pressure, volumes, those kinds of things?
As far as the actual application pressure or volume, I mean, it's changed over the years, but we're not spraying with the frequency that we did before. We've probably cut our herbicide applications by 25 to 30% easily, sometimes up to 50, depending on the year. Every year is not the same. But I mean, we've definitely reduced the number of trips we're making across the field and the number of times that our acres will see a certain chemistry during the year. We were heavily on Roundup, and it might be that an acre saw Roundup 4 or 5 times during a season, and that would be I guess 10 years ago or so. Basically, we're to the point now where we try to make sure our acres only see a chemical once every growing season. So we try to only use Roundup once per season. And that helps to keep a rotation on what we're doing as far as what we're managing those weeds with, so that those weeds only see that particular herbicide one time.
Okay, one quick question. You got this, I've seen your fields, Zeb. You got 6 inches of residue, but Zeb's going to show us some pictures of this later. How in the world can we get spray down through 6 inches of residue and get weed control? I mean, that just, my limited brain has a little trouble. Is that an issue, or what?
We're still using a residual when or after the planter goes through. We'll come back and we put a residual down. I've done some plots and done some small fields, some 15, 20 acre fields where we left that residual out, and it's doable. We definitely had a little more pigweed pressure, which pigweed would be our main weed concern from a resistance standpoint. We had a little more pigweed pressure if we left that residual out. So somehow we're getting something through that 4-inch thick mat. It's how much of it is actually getting through there, I'm not sure, but it makes a difference when we leave it out.
Okay. Let me ask Robbie, you got any comments? How's that? What have you seen on your farm related to weed control and those types of things? And Robbie's he's just joining us by phone, folks, so you won't see his face like we have Zeb and Wills and myself there. So go ahead, Robbie.
Yeah, I'm very much like Zeb. I mean, and Will, of course, Will knows all of our farms like the back of his hand, but the cover crops have every year reduced weed pressure. And of course, the new varieties of seed use different types of herbicides that seem to control some of these hard weeds like pigweed, and I think what we see, like in my farming operation, we can control the fields in the middle of the fields really good all during the year, reduce the amount of herbicides, and where you're seeing the pressure sometimes are at the end of the rows or around the edge of the fields, and you have to hit those a little bit harder. Okay. But in my operation, I use 2 consulting firms. Really has reduced herbicide rate because they cross-section the fields. I get a good comparison by using 2 consulting firms. I think it saves me money in the long run. I don't use them on the same farms. I use them on different farms, of course, but you just get patches of weeds. They pick them out. You clean those up. And so, I mean, it's a win-win for everybody: the soil, water, the farmer, the cost. It's and from a cotton gin standpoint, I'll just brag on my producers. We got the cleanest cotton farmers, and that's what they do here. They grow cotton. But we have the cleanest cotton farmers anywhere around. I've reduced the equipment in the gin, especially the lint cleaners, that every time you run cotton through a lint cleaner, you take cotton from the farmer to clean it. We've reduced that in half. We give the farmer a much better return on his yield, and the grades come back phenomenal. Very seldom do you see a reduced bale by the cotton produced by these farmers.
I hadn't really thought about that aspect, Robbie. So clean weed control means clean cotton at harvest, which means when you're processing or ginning it there at your place, then you have a reduced cost. So that's a win-win for everybody. Okay.
And when he sells it, he's selling a top quality bale, which puts more money in his pocket as well.
Oh, that's good. Oh, well, I want to go back to you real quick. You mentioned winter weeds. Now, I'm going to put you on the spot here. What's the difference between a winter weed and using a cover crop that's that's prescriptive? You want to get something done with it.
Our biggest thing with winter weeds, some of them can be limited on what herbicides can control them. And people say, well, why do I want to control a winter weed? Because it's going into physiological maturity at plant, and it's not really going to pose any threat. Well, eventually you're going to have a seed bank that may cause some issues. But the biggest thing for us as we move down the line on this soil health, by nature, most weeds, whether they're winter annuals or summer, they don't do anything for the biological structure. And, plants, it's that stupid scenario about which comes first, the chicken or the egg. Well, both of them are important in the same way with this soil microbiology. We need the biology to drive the plants, but the plants are basically what's driving the biology. It's a cohesion together. And, what makes these diverse cover crops so important, a grass crop supports one community of biological systems as well as a legume, and then a brassica and all that. Well, and then, of course, if you look at certain varieties or certain types of small grain, for example, rye supports a different mycorrhizal than wheat versus oats versus barley versus triticale, whatever you want to do. Well, to think about it, that great picture you have behind you there of a warm season annual cover crop, David, you've basically got the same diversity, if not more, living in that soil that you physically cannot see. Now, I guess the greatest gauge of that would be if you saw an earthworm or something, but there's so many other life systems in there that support that earthworm that you'll never know about or can't see with the naked eye. So, having that cover crop is important from a biological structure, from having cycling of nutrients, because basically with these warm season broadleafs, for example, and some of the winter annuals, they're basically pulling a lot of the nitrates out. Well, basically that weed is using that nitrate to produce a seed, whereby that cover, we're growing it for a living mulch. So eventually we might get some trade-offs as far as cycling that nitrogen throughout the growing season or something. So those are things to think about. And also that rooting depth, that is so important, because as that, say for example, we've got a cover crop of cereal rye, as that rye root goes on down and that rye plant terminates, whether we terminate it with a herbicide or we terminate it mechanically with a cover crop roller, as that plant dies, that root dies as well. Well, basically the skeletal remains, so to speak, of that root stays in that soil. It keeps it open. It's that void there. Rather than running that ripper, we have all this fine root structure that's opened up. So when that cotton plant starts to take off, and the cotton plant is very weak by nature because it doesn't have a cotyledon, and it's very stressed early on in its growth and development stages. As that cotton plant starts to develop that root, it goes down in that root channel that was opened up for that cereal rye. And because that root channel's still there, that cotton plant in its early stages does not have to exert the energy, does not have to pull on its food resources to develop a much larger plant versus one that's growing in a stale seed bed that doesn't have those root channels in place.
Okay. Yeah, you hit on it. Go ahead.
Just to piggyback on what Will said, I don't want to forget about it, and I don't have the pictures in with my stuff today. I've gone digging and playing around in the fields, looking at stuff before, and it was usually about this time frame, February, March of the year. And I dug up rye and triticale plants that were 3 and 4 inches tall, and dug down in and looked, and whether it was the entire root system or whether it broke off, but it really amazed me because I had a 3 to 4 inch tall shoot of that rye or that triticale on top of the ground that had 12 to 14 inches of root underneath it. So, I mean, if you think about that, as that plant continues to grow, and, we have rye that'll get up to 4 or 5 feet tall sometimes if we allow it to grow towards the end of April. The root system that's going to be under there and the penetration that we're getting into the soil profile, if we allow that stuff to grow as long as we possibly can, you're going to have a tremendous root system that's there.
Yeah, so I really like what Will said. So the last year's cover crop roots go away, but that allows channels for this year's commodity crop, whether it be cotton, soybeans, or corn, to take advantage and move down through there and get there. Now, so with all this root activity, what about drainage? Is that, Will, you had mentioned something about a high water table. You'd mentioned something about sealing off, 1/10 of an inch. That doesn't sound like much water, 1/10 of an inch an hour. That doesn't sound like much water. What have you seen? And I'd like to get observations from all three of you related to infiltration, and then the other side of it, when it gets hot in the middle of July and you're needing water. Do you see any benefits that way?
The greatest thing regarding soil water, whether it would be water on the surface or within itself, is having that living root channel. Where we're seeing guys that are veteran no-tillers who have got a lot of experience with cover crops, whether they be single species or multiple species, we don't see the ponding issues. We definitely don't see the runoff issues, and we see a lot less issues with subsurface drainage problems. Now, I'm not saying that drainage tile is not a good thing, because we've got a lot in this county and it's certainly been beneficial. I don't think that we would ever get to the point on some of our high water table soils that I could say, hey, plant a cover crop, don't worry about the drain tile. I'm not saying that, because we need to all look at each field individually. But we have seen certainly the runoff issue. That was kind of low hanging fruit. That was a no brainer. We don't have, even on our slope fields, no issues there. Those silt loams that have those infiltration issues of less than 1/10 of an inch per hour, when you get those silts locked up, and because of it being a loam, there's some sand there, there's some clay there. Well, when those, it's almost like a natural concrete. It's just an ideal mixture to repel water, for lack of a better terms. The only way we can get that changed is with organic matter. And I don't mean by applying manure and tilling it in, because that's just, again, a temporary fix. We have to have something living in that soil biologically. That biology is the only way. Now, the trade-off is when we have these high water table scenarios, we have some anaerobic conditions. And with anaerobic comes low oxygen levels. And with low oxygen, you have low biological systems. Much like us, the biology needs air too. So that's where drainage tile comes into play. In those areas where we have some severely high water tables, we've got to remove some excess water in order to get oxygen levels there to function. The thing of it is, we need to take whatever we've experienced in production agriculture in the last 150 years and utilizing it moving forward. It's amazing to me, as a ag memorabilia collector, I've got stuff prior to the Civil War just right around the corner from me here in files. But it's amazing, even at the turn of the last century, when they were looking at improving organic matter, on these wore out cotton plantations in the Southeast. And those guys were describing some of the same scenarios, other than weed issues, that we have today. Poor fertility, poor soil structure, just drainage issues, runoff issues, you name it. And it's sad for us to have so much technology developed in our equipment and our seeds now, but yet our production problems are still the same. But here's the thing that rings true. Those guys 100 years ago were using cover crops to achieve benefits. Guess what? We're using the same thing today. This is the thing that links us into the past and certainly is going to have an opportunity in the future.
Robbie, what has been your experience? Have you seen any changes? Will did a really good job of explaining what happens. Have you seen any tangible improvements in your fields related to drainage and as Will was describing there?
Yeah, and the programs that are available, and of course, you know, Will kind of headed a lot of these equip programs up to where you come in and use a multiple of seed varieties for cover. Like I've got 200 acres in a program now that I plant triticale, clover, and rape, and all this helps with drainage, with reducing the amount of nitrogen you've got to put back in the soil, gives you a much thicker, heavier cover, and it's just getting better, you know, every year. And with folks like Will, I keep using his name, but he just stays on top of everything and advises all of us farmers. He knows us all well, gives us good advice, and most of the time, I don't know of many that don't follow his lead.
Well, that's why Will's on the show, on the showcase here, Robbie. Zeb, why don't we go ahead? Zeb's going to walk us through his system, what he's doing. It was through some slides, and I wouldn't mind having maybe Robbie or Will comment as we go through that, you know, to get some observations, like, you know, what you may be doing a little different or something like that. So, Zeb, why don't we go ahead and have your slides come up and you walk us through what the Zeb Winslow secret to soil health is here. So.
There's not one secret, David. I guess the secret is to keep on trying. I guess a little bit of history on our farm. We're in Scotland Neck, North Carolina, and I'm a smaller producer for this area. My father and I together tend about 750 acres. And we transitioned out of conventional tillage into a strip till and cover crop system in the late 90s and early 2000s. So we've been doing this for a little while. In 2014, thanks to a program through Soil and Water Conservation, NRCS, we planted our first multi-species cover crop. Prior to that, we were using a KMC strip till rig, which you can see a little bit of hooked to our planters in this picture. And we would plant a single species cover crop, usually triticale, and we'd let it get up, you know, maybe as tall as the top of your boots. End of March, beginning of April, we'd kill it and we would strip till into it, and it was crunchy and dead when we went out there and did it, and there was very little residue left once we had terminated that stuff when we planted into it. In the fall of 2013, going into the 2014 growing season, we planted our first multi-species cover, which was mainly triticale and radish. But I had heard a lot of stuff on multi-species blends, a lot of really extraordinary claims of what they could do. Figured we'd try it. So we put in 40 acres of 5-species blend that year. Drilled it in, and when we went in to plant corn in mid-April, this is what it looked like. About a week before this picture was taken, my father looked at me and he said, "How are you going to plant into that stuff? Don't we need to kill it?" I said, "I don't know. Let me call the guy that sold me the seed and ask him what we're supposed to do to it." So I called and had a really long conversation with the guy who sold me the seed that we had planted, and he asked me what kind of system we were using to plant. everything else. And after about a 20-30 minute conversation, he said, you don't need to worry about it. Take that strip till rig and planter and go plant into it green. I said, excuse me? And he said, go plant into it green. You don't need to kill it. It'll handle it fine. I said, okay. Hung up the phone. My dad found me later that day. He said, so what are we going to do with this? I said, well, we're going to plant into it green. Y'all, I know how Jack's mother looked at him when he sold the cow for Magic Beans, because that's the exact look that I got from my father. We went round and round on this for a while, and I finally just told him, I said, give me one afternoon. If we can't do it, we'll spray it all with Bromoxone. It'll be dead in 3 days. At worst, it costs us a couple days. So when we started planting corn, we fell into it, we planted it, and honestly, we've never looked back. We've stumped our toe, we've bumped our heads a couple times on it, but we've had a really good experience overall. We've learned a lot.
Let me ask a question here, Zeb. So what's the concern? It seems like there's two things that could go wrong with planting green. One, mechanical, and then two, biological. Maybe. Yeah. So can you kind of address what your issues? Have you had any problems either way, mechanical or biological?
Short answer, yes.
Okay.
We've had both. It's not easy. We've come a long way. We had luckily we had really good luck to start, which kind of got us committed to this before we really hit a few snags. We planted into some huge cover crops and had great results. And then we planted into some huge cover crops and had just complete failures. It's really been a learning process, and we're finally starting to dial some of that in and into a happy medium. You're going to have mechanical problems every year, and everybody's planters are going to be a little bit different. Everybody's system is going to be a little bit different. But you can dial that in as you go to kind of figure out what you want to do. I would not recommend anyone who hasn't done this before planting an entire farm into stuff that looks like this picture. Start small. 10, 15, 20 acres, it's a whole lot easier to figure out how to do 10 acres than it is to figure out how to do 1,000. So starting small would be something I would greatly suggest. And if we can go to the next picture on there, it'll kind of show what this looked like coming out the back of that planter. This was just the triticale and radish. Most of the radish winter killed. So this is what we strip tilled most of our stuff into that year. It's a really light biomass cover. It did really, really well for us. And then the next picture, I think, is going to be looking out the back of that same tractor. That's what it looked like behind the planter in that first field that we planted into. The corn came up wonderful. That's a KMC strip till rig with a pretty much standard set of John Deere planters behind it. And we had a really good stand and, had normal yields for us that year. We have moved from, over the last 7 years now, we've moved from 100% strip till to we're now 100% no till. And then the next slide that we've got on there is actually what it looks like behind our planter now.
Go ahead, Shelley.
Shelley, can we go to the next picture? This is a couple years ago, and I believe this was actually planting cotton that year. But you can see we're using a roller crimper now, and we roll all of that cover crop flat. We've got a row cleaner on there that just barely parts that cover that you can see where the row units are running. And it's kind of a system that has evolved that it has worked fairly well for us. We've had some issues the last couple of years, especially with cotton, and we're getting to the point now where I think I've set up a rig and going to play with it some this year, where we're going to take a herbicide, maybe like a grass herbicide like clethodim or something like that, come in and actually spray strips into this cover crop before we plant. Take out all of the rye, the oats, the triticale that's in that mix, which will leave us a nice clean spot with just a little bit of clover that we're planting into, which hopefully will help us with stand and emergence and give us just a cleaner place to plant into, because cotton is hit or miss sometimes. And if you plant cotton into a really high residue cover like this, and you happen to get a heavy rain coming behind it, you're going to have some issues.
So Zeb, this was what? The first, you strip tilled in 2013. That was the first picture. This one is what, 2015 or 16, something like that?
Yes, sir. Probably looking at that set of planters, that was probably 16, maybe 17. With the set of planters that you're looking at there, that was when we first started playing around with no-till just by itself. And we actually would take the rippers off of the strip till rig and pull all 8 rippers off of it and then just go out and run. And that was how we first started playing around with not using that ripper, just to prove to ourselves that it would work.
Okay. Zeb, before you go on, let me ask Robbie. Robbie, what is your system similar to this, or what kind of challenges have you all ran into? So it sounds like it's more mechanical than it is biological, Zeb. So I'm just curious what Robbie's comments might be on this.
Well, let me say to start with, now I still have my cow, so I used a traditional burn down, and so I don't plant in this type of cover, but I do use half of my acres. I plant no-till. Half of my acres, depending on the soil types, I use a strip till, where it's really hard to get the seed in the ground with a no-till rig. And then if I can, if the weather's right, the soil's right, I try to switch it the next year and plant no-till where I did strip till and strip till where I did no-till. But Zeb was one of the farmers in the Better Cotton Initiative that I hosted for 3 years, and he actually he and Will both gave a talk to all the brands and retailers in New York, and they came down to Scotland Neck, and we hosted a luncheon for them. And I don't think they had any idea that the American farmer had been advanced as much as people like Zebby. He's leading this battle, because you won't see a lot of people do this, and hopefully he's going to find a technique that all of us will do, like using cover crops.
Okay. Did you notice, was a cotton or corn do better no-till versus strip till? Did you notice that in what you're doing there?
On the yields? No.
Just standing there.
Now I can't tell the difference in yields, no-till or strip till, and I'll probably be going, as you know, if I'm sure the planters are improved from what I'm using right now. The only problem I have with the no-till is on some soils, especially if the soils start getting a little dry, I'm having a hard time getting the seed in the ground with the no-till rigs. But like Will said, we got all kinds of varieties of soil here, but it's faster using no-till. I like the no-till better, and I'll probably increase the amount of acres that I do no-till in the next coming years.
Okay.
But I can't see a difference in the yield. Once you get a stand, I can't tell the difference.
Okay. Will, you got any comments related to this, or?
No, I tell you, I'm really glad that Zebby was willing to take the charge on planting green and cotton, or planting cotton in green cover crop, because traveling around the state, this is something that's kind of on the forefront. It's an interest of some producers, but everybody's a little bit gun shy because it's so innovative. And of course, Zeb would be able to address this more than myself, but the biggest question that I got from producers outside of this county was, what were the insect pressures like? Because they were thinking that almost that cover crops were acting as some type of refuge situation. And I don't think we saw that. You know, I'm not saying that every year is going to be the same. And again, Zeb would approach this a lot better. The other thing is that I hear so much about letting these covers get so large is, well, it's going to pull all the moisture away from my seed. And surely, yes, cover crops take some moisture up as they mature, like all crops will. But I don't think that we have ever seen a scenario in this part of the world where we had a bone dry spring based on cover crop. Again, what we've seen with the cover crops are a system that's a lot more stable than certainly more than the conventional seed bed, and even more stable than some strip till scenarios with no cover at all. You know, it is, I don't want to say a picture perfect, but it seems to me, in talking with producers like Zeb and working with them over the years, it's almost as close to ideal planting conditions as you want, unless you have just an abnormal amount of rain or something like that.
And I guess to jump back in on some of that, a lot of these pictures, I've planted into some really huge cover crops. I've planted into some you know, better than 8,000 pound per acre above ground biomass stuff. And for a while, I thought that was the best way to go about it. I really don't think that a huge amount of above ground biomass is necessary. You know, a 4,000 to 5,000 pound above ground biomass is a lot more manageable. It's a lot more friendly to plant into, and you get pretty much the same results out of it towards the end of the year as you do something that's really huge. So we've kind of taken a step back and are actually trying to grow a little bit smaller, more manageable covers now, just because it mitigates some of the risk in getting a stand to come up through them, because it's not guaranteed. You know, we got lucky in the beginning. The last 2 years, we've had some cover crops that have just given us a fit trying to get stuff established, which is why we came up with the idea of maybe spraying that little alleyway in them to go back and plan into, to try to give that seed the best of both worlds, if you will, to give it a really optimum place to be able to have good warm soil and also have the benefits of having had that cover crop there.
So Zeb, what's the difference from a farmer? How do you tell 8,000 pound residue versus 4 to 5,000? What's your kind of eyeballing? How do you do that?
3,000 to 4,000 pounds, you're probably scared to plant in it. 8,000 pounds, you're terrified to plant in.
Okay, well, okay. I mean, is there a height different than the cover crop? I mean, at what point do you decide?
David, it all depends on what you plant.
Okay.
It all depends on, you know, what you've got out there in the field and how it grows. You know, looking at that particular picture, I would say that's, you know, maybe 4,000 to 5,000 pounds per acre. If I had to guess, you know, I'm pretty comfortable with that. The 8,000 pound stuff starts to get, Bigfoot could be hiding in there for you.
Yeah, have you noticed the difference weed control wise? I know Dr. Culpepper talks about high biomass being the key to pigweed suppression. So
I think if you're willing to let it grow and give it some time, you know, if you've got something that's 12 inches tall, if you've got a cover crop out there that's 12 inches tall and you go out and kill it, it's not going to provide the same weed reduction or the same moisture retention through the year as something that's, you know, waist high. You start to get into something that's 3-4 feet tall, you know, and I'm just kind of spitballing with some ideas, but 3 or 4 feet tall, when you start to get into some rye and, you know, triticale, you can start to count on some weed suppression and, you know, some moisture retention benefits out of that.
Okay. Why don't you keep going with your trip through your planting season here? So I didn't mean to interrupt.
Okay. Well, we've looked at the planting. If I'm remembering right, I think the next picture, Shelly, if you can pull that up, is actually our roller crimper. Oh no, this was cotton into our triticale. We planted into everything standing that first year, and you can see the cotton coming up, you know, in the strip till rows there. with the residue. And I mean, to give you an idea, we saw a weed suppression benefit out of just this much cover that first year. You know, it wasn't anywhere near the amount of weed suppression we're getting now, but that little bit of residue will make a difference in trying to hold back some of your weeds. I think the next picture we've got is actually a look at some of our stuff last year, 2020 or 2019. If we can go to that one. Well, I don't remember what pictures I put in here, y'all. I'm sorry. This is our roller crimper, the first year that we ever used it, coming in to plant cotton behind it. And you can see we've got about, looking at where it is on the tractor with the hubs on there, it's about waist high. It's putting down a really nice mat. And when you get into using something like this, you're going to see some real benefits as far as controlling your weed pressure and also helping you hang on to moisture throughout the year, which I think those are probably the first two things that most growers will see if they start going into a cover crop and soil health system. If we can go on. Go ahead, David.
Rolling it down like that, does that add to that value, or why are you rolling it?
I think it does. And I mean, you can see in this picture where we're taking all of that, you know, 3.5 foot tall worth of plant matter there, and we're putting it all down on the ground. So not only is that helping with holding the weeds back and making it harder for the weeds to get through there, is hanging on to moisture. And also when we come through, we're able to part this with a row cleaner. And when we get our cotton, corn, soybean, whatever our cash crop is that's coming up, when it pops up through there, it doesn't have to compete with all the rest of that residue that's still standing. It just has to make it through that mat, and then it's off to the races. And you've got that whole mat there that's basically going to hold back any competition.
Okay. Now, does that last throughout the year, or does you have trouble keeping residue in September?
Depending on the mix, depending on what grew in it, most of the time we will have a little bit of rye residue that's left at the end of the year. We're getting to the point now where our soils are cycling this stuff, that by the end of the year, we've got just barely a little bit of rye left on the ground. All of our legumes, all the triticale and oat residue that was there is gone. And that's one of the reasons that we use a multi-species blend, is because we are pulling those nutrients up out of the soil during the winter while it's growing. And then with the legumes, the oats, the triticale, and the rye, you've almost got a staged release of those nutrients in there, because the first thing that'll break down are your legumes. They'll be gone in 30 to 45 days after we plant. The oats will be the next thing that's broken down. The triticale will come next to last, and then the rye will be the absolute last thing that the biology breaks down and cycles all of that back into the soil.
Okay. Let me ask one more question, Zeb. I'll keep moving here. We had a question about the biology. Have you noticed a change? You're providing a food source. You're getting changing the habitat. You've reduced your pesticide usage. What's been your impact on your biology, and how are you as a farmer gauging the improvement? I guess would be, man, that's a tough question. I don't know.
I've definitely seen an increase in our biology, above ground, below ground. It took a little bit of time, but I mean, the amount of life that we see when we walk into one of these fields, whether it be, like this one is before it's planted or even afterwards, the birds, the small mammals that we'll find, I'm seeing field mice in places where I haven't normally seen them. And y'all will have to excuse me, I get excited about this side of it sometimes, just because I spend a lot of time in my fields, and I have friends of mine that say, you're crawling around on your hands and knees. What are you doing out there? Well, I'm looking for stuff, and I'm gauging that improvement that you asked about. There's a full battery of soil health tests, of soil tests, of different tests for microbes and balances of this and everything else that you can take soil and send out, and people will tell you how you're doing. The easiest way that you can figure out what's going on in your soils and to figure out how they're improving is to put your footprints in your shadow out there. Get out there, dig around a little bit, figure out what's going on. There's no product that you can buy that can replace your shadow being in your field. That's how you figure out, what's going on and how you figure out to make it work for your system, because what I'm doing isn't going to work necessarily for Robbie, or isn't going to necessarily work for, a neighbor of mine that's directly across the highway. Everybody has a different objective. Everybody has a different why for what they're going to do with this. And that's kind of the main thing you've got to figure out, is what direction you're headed in and what drives you. So, I mean, we've seen increases in above and below ground biology. We see worms, we see pill bugs and all grades of spiders and other types of, different arthropods and beetles and everything else that are in our soils when I go looking around under the residue throughout the year. We see birds, turkeys, all grades of wildlife when we start to get in the fields and roll these covers down. So, I mean, yes, we've definitely seen an increase in biology. We've also seen a huge increase in our soil structure, in the way that our soils look, in the way that they smell, in the way that they handle, rainfall and everything else. So, I mean, it's been a big transformation just to see what's happened.
Okay. What? One more question, then I'll shut up. You use any manure? And Robbie, I wouldn't mind having you chime in on that a little bit. Do you put any manure, chicken litter, and that kind of stuff?
The green manure right there is, we're growing our own. Okay. But no, as far as animal waste, we raised hogs up until February of '96. So I've had land that has had hog waste on it during that time frame, but outside of that, no, we're not importing any sort of manures or nutrients into the farm other than our synthetic fertilizers that we're using. Okay.
Well, Robbie, what about you? Are you using any manures or?
Not now. I have about 2 years ago on one farm that had just some dead sand. I spread a good bit of chicken litter to see if I could get a better yield. I couldn't really tell the difference from what I was doing normally with my fertilizer program, so I only used it 1 year.
Okay. All right. Well, go ahead, Zeb. Keep going with your slides here.
Okay. All right. Well, let's go on to the next picture, please. Okay. This is the other one that I talked about before. This is what our cotton looks like now. Once we get it up and going, you can see the residue that's still there. We're somewhere around 5 to 6 leaf stage on the left, and I'm guessing we've got blooms in there, so probably middle of July in the picture on the right. And I mean, you can see we've still got a lot of residue that's hanging around under there. And to give you an idea, normally in our cotton production system, we will burn down, we'll roll that cover down, we'll plant it, we'll come behind the planter with burn and one residual herbicide, basically pre-emergence spray. And then normally we will have one more trip across that field with usually Roundup. It's usually a broad spectrum herbicide, depending on what our weed problem is. But normally we have a pre-emergence burn down and residual and one more over the top post herbicide spray. And that's our normal herbicide program. The field that you're seeing on the right there, that's how that field was grown. We may have to clean up around the ends a little bit or spot spray here and there. But that's where we're seeing a lot of our savings as far as our production budget is in the weed control that we're getting out of that mat that's sitting underneath that cotton. So let's head to the next picture, please. The other thing that I've kind of been harping on as one of the benefits that you'll see is moisture retention and or water management. When we started this, the one thing that I got was something Will mentioned that I heard from a lot of neighbors was those cover crops are going to use up all your moisture. You're not going to have anything. You're not going to have any moisture to plant into. Luckily, we had some soil probes that measured moisture on the farm. So I left a check strip in my cover crop and stuck them in there. And just to see what would happen. That's a 15-foot wide check strip, same moisture probes, same soil, and just kind of watched them throughout the year to see what would happen. If we can go to the next picture. And I believe this was the middle of February. We got about a 3/4 of an inch rain that came in. It wasn't excessively heavy, but it was a pretty quick rain that came through. Had about 3/4 of an inch of rain overnight one night. I got up the next morning, looked at the moisture probes to see what was going on out there. The one on the left, you can see, is the check strip where there was no cover, and the little green bar on the right side. We infiltrated moisture down to 20 inches where we had no cover. And you'll have to forgive me, I can't see all the way down. But if memory serves, on the right side where we had cover crop, infiltrated moisture down to somewhere around 40 inches. Yeah. So, I mean, we put moisture twice as deep in the profile just because of the root system that was there on those covers. And I mean, those covers are 2 inches tall. So if they're doing that at that stage of the game, imagine what they're going to do, you know, in March and April, and then what those same root channels and that residue being on top of the ground is going to be able to do throughout your growing season. If we have a little bit of rain that comes through, maybe we're able to hang on to it. Maybe we can put it farther in that profile and store it away for later in the year. Or maybe we get, you know, 1/10 or 2 of an inch of rain, and the next day it doesn't evaporate when it's 95 degrees because that cover crop residue is keeping our soils cooler. So it's just, I thought that was a pretty striking way to kind of see how quickly this stuff can work. And if I'm remembering, we were 3 years into this system when these pictures were taken. So I mean, that's pretty quick. It's not like this is something that took 10 or 15 years to build the ability to be able to do this. You can do this in a pretty short amount of time. So let's go ahead and go to the next slide, please. This is that same check strip in April. And I guess the weed control and keeping the weeds at bay is the other thing we really talked about. And to me, this kind of shows that you can choose what kind of green you're going to have in your field. On either side of that 15-foot check strip, we've got a cover crop that I'm not going to have any problem controlling. I'm going to roll it down, spray it, kill it, plant into it, and we'll be fine. The stuff that's in the middle there, you know, for anybody that's familiar with Italian rye, that is a bumper crop of Italian rye that is probably Roundup resistant in that 15-foot check strip. And it's something I'd rather not deal with. So, you know, I can come in, plant this cover crop and not have to worry about the weeds, because basically you can kind of count on the fact that Mother Nature is not going to let a void or a vacuum exist but so long. Something's going to grow on that acre of land when the conditions are fit for it to grow. So you can choose what you want to grow out there, or you can roll the dice and see what comes up.
Yeah, that's a really good point, Zeb. Choose what you want, or let nature choose it for you. That's a good point.
I mean, because something's going to grow eventually. And not everything's going to die in March like the chickweed that is dying now. So let's go and see what we've got next in here. Just really quick, when we were pulling rippers, this was an 8-row strip till rig. When we were ripping our ground, we were burning through 10.8 gallons per hour that you can see on there. And the exact same 8-row, 36-inch set of planters in this next picture, you can see we dropped that down to 1.7 gallons per hour. That's just another savings that we're putting that same crop in. We're not having to pull those rippers because we've got roots down there that are doing our tillage for us instead of having to rely on steel. When we were pulling that strip till rig, we were filling up our tractor. We were filling up a 200 horsepower tractor every day with about 130 to 150 gallons of fuel, if I'm remembering right. Now we can fill up that same tractor with the same set of planters on the back of it. We'll run for 3 or 4 days before we have to think about putting fuel in it. So, it's just even if we're not increasing our yield, we're decreasing our costs and still increasing our profits. So that's kind of, that's the mindset that we've had to take just to make all of this work and to try to stay profitable. Let's move on to the next one. I was talking with David not too long ago, and he mentioned anything that we were trying new for this year. Prior to this year, we've established all of our covers with a grain drill. And we were normally seeding about 50 pounds to the acre of our cover crop species blend. This year, we dropped and quit using the grain drill and started using a 15-inch planter that we have here that we use to plant our soybeans. And basically, I'm just looking at the fact that I can utilize an asset that we already have. I can only have to maintain that one piece of equipment because my grain drill is requiring quite a bit of maintenance to keep it going. This is a picture of a cover crop blend that was planted in mid-October. That picture was taken this morning. This is on 15-inch rows. We cut our seed rate almost by a little over a third. We're seeding right at 32 pounds to the acre here of a rye, triticale, oat, clover, vetch, winter pea, and radish blend. And with dialing that back, a lot of people talk about the cost of cover crop seed. My seed cost on this was just over $20. We were right about $21. And that was a complete custom bought blend that was delivered here to the farm. We didn't mix it. I didn't grow my own seed. So, I mean, it's a very economical way to be able to put this in. And with the amount of herbicides that we're being able to cut back, I can more than compensate for that $21, $22 an acre cost in the savings that I'm picking up throughout the year. And timing does have a lot to play. Timing does play a lot with when you're establishing these cover crops. This was mid-October, and the next picture we've got is the exact same blend that was planted probably in later November, if we can go to that one. There's a difference in what we've got above ground. And to be completely honest, I didn't know that we were ever going to see this cover crop because it didn't come up until it really did not start to show itself until maybe the end of February. And then it popped out of the ground and has really taken off. But the biology and everything underneath the ground looks the same in both of these fields. So, I mean, we're really getting benefit out of this way later into the season when we're planting it. And it's early, but I also think that 15-inch planter is maybe giving us a little better stand when we're planting it later in the year than we were getting out of the grain drill. And then the final picture is just a side-by-side comparison of stuff that was planted in mid-October versus stuff that was planted in the last of November. And you can see the stuff on the left, you can barely see it there, but it's coming up. And there's, every species in that mix is accounted for in those little bitty rows on the left of that picture.
So are you pretty happy with the diverse, you planted 3 or 4 species, I think I heard you say. Are you pretty happy the way it came out? If you look at a row, it looks like I'm seeing some Those brassicas coming up in there, a lot of grasses, greens. Are you pretty happy with the mix as it comes up there?
Yes, sir. Yes, sir. I have been really, really happy with the way that with the way that a 15-inch planter is a regular vacuum planter. We just bought a set of plates to put it in there. And I've been really happy with the way that it handled it, the stand that we've gotten, and just the overall, it sped us up a little bit versus the grain drill. We didn't have anywhere near the disturbance of the soil. So I've been really happy with it.
So what kind of plates did you have to get?
There's a couple different options for plates. The ones that we went with are from a company called Seed Right, and it's I think they make plates for deer. They make plates for John Deere planters. They make plates for Kinsey planters. I think they make them for precision planting units too. I think there's two other options out there, but they were the most accessible, and I think they might have been the cheapest as well. But I mean, they work really, really well.
So how'd you choose your population on that? By planters, you pick by dropping so many seeds. How many seeds were you dropping here?
We ordered the seed plate that we ordered was a wheat or a small grain seed plate, and they actually give you a chart for pounds per acre to go along with that goes back to the transmission settings and everything on the planter, and it's actually pretty accurate. We planted some wheat on 15-inch rows this year, and the settings they gave us were pretty much dead on there. With the cover crop blends, we had to run it 100% below their recommendation. So we just kind of dialed that in, and actually we measured out. We took a coffee can and weighed it and measured out the certain pounds of cover crop into each hopper, and then planted it until it ran out. And that's how we kind of dialed in our seed rate on it.
Okay. All right. Well, good. Well, now, always innovative there, Zeb. That's really great. I appreciate that. So why don't we go ahead and close out your slides, and we want to bring in, Zeb was leading more into the economics there a little bit and some of the benefits. So why don't we go ahead, Archie, why don't you key up your slides? And Archie Flanders, again, I mentioned, is a Soil Health Institute's economist, and he went through and visited with Zeb last winter and came up with I'll just let him explain what he did there. So go ahead, Archie, and take it over, and hang in there, Zeb, and Robbie and Will. We may be having some questions come your way here in a little bit.
As Dave mentioned, Zeb was leading into some economic aspects. We want to continue with that, with the economic presentation, and ask the question, is there a business case for farmers adopting soil health management systems? Specifically, the soil health management systems increase profitability. And to do that, we'll take a look at cost and benefits, noting that incremental production changes due to adoption of soil health management systems affect 4 components of farm profitability. The first component is potentially reduce expenses as a benefit. Secondly, additional revenue as a benefit. This will be in the case if you have increased crop yields due to the soil health management system. Also, there are additional expenses as a cost. If you're going to plant a cover crop, as Zeb mentioned, you have the cost of the cover crop seed as one example of a cost. And then finally, potentially, if the soil health management system experiences reduced yields, that would be reduced revenue. So to determine the cost and benefits, we take the summation of 1 and 2, the 2 benefits, and subtract the summation of 3 and 4, which are the 2 items of cost. Note that when we look at the information today, that partial budget results are changes in net farm income, not absolute values. And there's further information about our methods for partial budget analysis at our website listed here. Okay, this is, as Zeb mentioned, some of his activities for his soil health management systems. We have two columns of costs on the left. These are reduced field activities and expenses. If you go from conventional till to no-till, the first thing that's always going to happen is you're going to have reduced expenses due to no longer tilling. So Zeb described to us that he has eliminated 2 disc trips and 1 field cultivator trip in his soil health management system for cotton. Today, we're just going to discuss Zeb's cotton soil health management system. He does have corn, soybeans also. We collected data for that, but today we're going to limit ourselves to cotton. So also, as Zeb has mentioned, he has reduced his herbicides. He has reduced chemicals of glyphosate, Valor, 2,4-D. Now that Zeb has gone to a no-till cover crop system, as he mentioned, he comes in and plants the cover crops with a 15-inch split row planter. And this is the cover crop species mix that he described to us: triticale, cereal rye, oats, crimson clover, hairy vetch, and then various brassicas. And this mix had a cover crop seed cost of $23 per acre. So as Zeb mentioned, he plants green with the no-till planter and a row of crimpers in front of the tractor. And so an additional spray application is Gramoxone and Reflex coming in after the cotton has been planted. So these are the financial results of what we just looked at as field activities. Zeb described to us, to come down to the revenue portion, that he was not attributing any increase in yield to the soil health management system, just reduced cost. So let's look at all the elements of cost. In the first column, as reduced expense, the equipment ownership is the value of the equipment on an annual basis of not doing those tillage activities. And associated that will be reduced costs in fuel and electricity, or just fuel for the equipment cost, and then labor to run the equipment. Of course, this is the key item that Zeb mentioned. He has reduced his herbicide cost $65.56 by using the cover crop and also roller crimping it down. This is something to note. These herbicide savings are largely due, as Zeb mentioned, to roller crimping to provide a mat to keep the weeds from coming through. So on the other column, we have the additional seed expenses, and this would be the cover crop seed cost. And then some herbicides have been added because of to terminate the cover crop. But notice the difference in herbicide expenses is about $55 reduction in herbicide expenses. So we have the total reduced expenses of $104.65, and then additional expenses with the no-till cover crop, $62.51. And so the net, since there is no change in yield, the net change in net farm income is an increase of $42.14, just solely to the reduction in expenses. So now we want to come and go back through this. We looked at the financials and give Zeb an opportunity to further comment about some of these. And Zeb, I think specifically we could come back and you mentioned it some about the 15-inch row split row planter, plant the cover crop, how that was working ideally for you. From having done this previous work, this is not the typical way that it's done, but it's notable that it's working well for you. And also your cover crop seed mix. Any thing you want to point out why you like this mix as opposed to other mixes? And then again, we have the row of crimping in front of the planting it green. This seems to be, since you had all the herbicide saving, this would be something to focus in where your increase in net farm income is, and that's from the combination of the cover crop and roller crimping it down. So Zeb, I'll let you go and comment on any of these items you'd like to.
Well, I mean, as far as the 15-inch split row planter, for me, that was just basically trying to utilize an asset that was there to get the most that I could out of the money that we had tied up in that planter. And then also it enabled me a lot more control over the placement and the amount of seed that we were putting out. So it looks like we're going to be able to get about the same benefits, maybe actually a little bit better result with using quite a bit less seed, which is enabling us to reduce the cost of our cover crop seed. The blend that we're using, the triticale, rye, oats, the clover, vetch, and then the brassicas, is something that we've kind of come to over the last few years. The more that we're putting out there, the better chance we have that something succeeds. I don't like putting all my eggs in one basket on pretty much anything. So if we've got a 5, 6, 7-way blend of cover crop that's going out there, we've got up to 7 chances or more, depending on what we plant, that something will grow. In the wetter parts of our fields, a lot of times we go all the way through a winter, and then now as things start to warm back up, we'll see oats come up in a wet part of the field. And that might be the only thing that makes it through. But oats always, in certain parts of our fields, oats are the one thing that always comes up. If I didn't have oats in there, maybe I'd have something with absolutely zero cover. So above and beyond, providing the diversity to our soil biology, it also gives me multiple chances to have a cover crop to help with the weeds and the moisture. The plant and green it's something that has worked for us. We're still trying to perfect it. And I don't know that we ever will. It seems like we change a little something about the way that we go about planting green every year, and just constantly trying to improve that and make it better for our crops, to find the best balance between this huge dense green mat and the perfect growing conditions for our cash crop. So that's kind of a dance that we're doing, but I feel like being able to put that residue on the ground and make that mat is something that definitely pays dividends back into my operation.
Okay, well, Zeb, we just presented our analysis for cotton, just looking at the field activities and especially the cover crop and planting green with a roller crimper. In your farm with corn and soybeans, are you able to do something pretty much similar with corn and soybeans, or do you have to make any drastic changes for these crops?
No, sir. We're pretty much able to, to follow the same blueprint across all 3 crops. And for the most part with the same results. Our soybean program, we've not seen our yields dramatically increase. We see kind of a gentle trend upward there, but we've cut out a huge amount of chemistry that we were counting on in being to grow soybeans, and also in narrowing those rows up and getting those rows down to 50 inches. That has helped us quite a bit with our weed control and being able to shade those middles and hold the weeds back compared to what we were doing when we were planting our beans on 36 inches like we are cotton. In corn, similar results as far as weed suppression and moisture retention. The one thing that we have seen in corn that is kind of interesting is that we're starting to be able to dial back our nitrogen inputs in corn, and we're seeing the same yields. So we're being able to cut down on the amount of nitrogen that we're supplying to our corn and being able to maintain our yields. We've tried it in cotton a couple times, and I think we're getting better, but we're not able to make any sort of fertility reductions in our cotton yet. But we are seeing it, just a little bit in corn. So maybe that's something that over the next few years we can start to see some more added gains from.
Okay. So would you attribute the reduction in nitrogen for corn to the legume in the cover crop mix?
I think some of it is going to be the legume and the cover crop mix. I think more importantly is going to be the fact that our soil is starting to function at a higher level. The soil biology is starting to come back into balance, and maybe we're able to see that start to break down some of this and cycle nitrogen and cycle nutrients the way that a healthy soil is meant to do. We had legumes in our mix 7 years ago, and we were doing the same comparisons in corn with cutting back nitrogen. And when we cut back nitrogen 7 years ago, it was a complete disaster. We had the same legumes in there, but we weren't able to cut the nitrogen back without having our yield just completely fall out of bed. So, now 7 years on, we've still got the same legumes in there, but something else has had to change in the functionality of our soil for us to be able to start to pull back on that nitrogen and the corn to maintain, what our historical yield is.
Yes, it's notable that these, a lot of time these benefits that show up economically do take some years before you can realize. For the herbicide reductions in cotton, how many years was it before you were able to?
If you're able to put a decent sized cover crop out there, and if you can, you can almost see herbicide reductions or at least weed pressure reductions immediately. At least in my experience. I mean, if you've got pigweed out there that looks like shag carpet, it's probably, it's not a silver bullet. It's not going to happen instantly. But, if you've got 100 pigweed per acre and you plant a cover crop, maybe you've got 25 or 50 pigweed per acre. You may not be able to instantly reduce your herbicide use, but maybe the number of plants or the number of weeds that are being exposed to that herbicide and the chance of resistance is less, I guess is the best way I can think to put it.
Okay, Zeb, we've looked at the numbers and your increase, and according to our calculations, $42.14 increase in net farm income due to reduced expenses from your soil health management system. And one other thing to comment that we really can't put a value to it, these reduction in tillage field activities must have a lot more free time for you to devote to farm management and other activities also. Would you comment on that?
Yes, sir. I mean, it does. I grew up in a full scale tillage operation. That was our normal. I was in my teens when we started this transition into strip till and everything else, and then now into what we're doing today. We may not always feel like we've got a lot more time compared to what we did then, but there's a lot less hours that are logged in the seat of a tractor because we're not making 3 passes or at least 2 passes over every acre before we're ready to plant it. A lot of times we're going straight out there and we're planting right into this stuff. So, I mean, it has freed up a lot of our time. And we also we don't have the erosion concerns that we used to have. When we were doing full scale tillage, we don't even have the erosion concerns that we had when we were using a strip till rig. It has really helped us to keep our soil in our fields where it can make us money.
Well, Zeb, we appreciate the opportunity to visit with and collect this information to do the analysis. And Dave, I'm going to turn it back over to you now.
Okay. All right, thanks, Archie. And why don't you stop sharing your screen there? Before we close out here, I did have a question come in. I'd like to get it from 2 different perspectives, with the producers and Will's perspective. And then Archie, I'm going to put you on the spot. Okay, ask you this because the question is about carbon markets. And that's something that you see out there. You hear some buzz about it. And I'm just kind of curious, Will or Zeb, Will and Robbie, what are you all hearing from your perspective on your side? And then Archie, maybe is there a way to bring that in, to an analysis, or what do you see that if you got an opinion on that? So go ahead. Maybe Will, I'll start off with you, and if you got any thoughts on that.
Absolutely. I think that carbon markets have a future for production agriculture. About 4 years ago, I was involved in a carbon marketing project that involved an 11,000 acre farm, not in this county, but in eastern North Carolina. We have quite a few landowners in eastern North Carolina that have been able to market their carbon credits. A lot of them were farmland that was drained 40 and 50 years ago that had been reverted back to natural wetland. Really, that's the prime case that I see. Talking with those that are in the carbon business, and I won't drop any names with companies or individuals at this point, but the biggest thing I see is the industry is following the California Air Resources Board standards of measurement. And they don't really have a good standard as far as production agriculture is concerned, or any type of production ag, whether it be vineyards, orchards, whatever. Really, it's wetlands, forested land, and a little bit with native grasslands. And any one of those three scenarios, the wetland issue, maybe some of the land in North Carolina are fitted, but not in a production ag scheme. I really think, and I see a lot of companies out there advertising about carbon market webinars for farmers and stuff, and maybe they have something tied down on. But the biggest thing that I see is before this thing gets broad scale, number one, it's got to be financially feasible. Number two, because remember, folks, we're selling these carbon credits to non-ag companies. Well, we have to have this that is acceptable by the environmental organizations for an offset for a non-ag company. So we've got to have some kind of standard in there. Does that, and I'll tell you from a government background, I don't think the government should be involved in it. That's just my personal opinion. I think that it needs to be private industry, but we really need to focus on how we're going to standardize this thing, because like with any unit of measure, 1 foot is the same in North Carolina as it is in California. Well, how are we going to measure that carbon footprint in North Carolina versus another state that might be heavily ag like us? The other thing is, how are we going to relate this to different commodities? Because, for example, peanuts are a big production commodity for us. Well, there has to be some tillage with peanuts as well as our sweet potato industry, because we have to dig these commodities out of the ground and invert it. Well, with any tillage pass, there's some carbon offsets. Does that peanut or potato guy need to be penalized because he has to do tillage to harvest his crop? I don't think so. And how much carbon offset do we associate with each tillage pass? These are all questions. And of course, I don't know that we'll ever have an exact measurement, but we need to come up with some kind of standard for that.
Good, thanks. What about you, Robbie? What, you got any thoughts on this from farmer and your perspective there?
No, I think Will pretty much said it all on that. I just don't think some of these states, we're all different in a way, and I think North Carolina is one of the leading ones as far as is no-till and cover crops, because you can drive across the country and you see a lot of land that they break every year. So I don't know how they're going to judge us, but I think we do as good a job in North Carolina as anywhere.
Yeah. Okay. That's a good point there, Robbie. Zeb, what about you? I know y'all were growing some hemp out there. Is this kind of what you see, a similar thing there? Maybe the market's not quite there. What's your thoughts on that?
Oh, I stuck my toe in the hemp market. We never actually grew any because it all seemed a little bit too risky, and the whole burden was pretty much put on the farmer. And so far, that's about what I've seen out of, I guess, the two exposures I've had to the carbon market. The contracts that I've seen, the stuff that I've looked at, it feels a little bit like the measurement's not quite there, but people are in a hurry to be able to market credits. And I guess I'm a little bit torn because, and I, it's just me personally, but what I'm doing on my farm, I'm going to do whether there's a carbon credit for it or not. So do I really want to sell that carbon credit as a get out of jail free card for somebody else to pollute? Sure, if the money's right, yes. But I mean, so far it just hasn't, it really does. It seems like maybe the whole concept and the whole market idea is a little bit too young, and it's being rushed a little bit.
Okay. Archie, let me ask you, the question to you would be, is there, do you see any potential revenue that should be considered, or what are your thoughts as an economist on something, how this ought to be kind of play out over the next several years, or if you have any?
Yes, so the carbon markets are, of course, still developing. The analysis that we presented today with partial budget analysis is not intended to be the complete economic picture of the benefits of the soil health management system, but it is limited to production inputs and potential yield output changes. So the type of analysis that we did for this would be something that wouldn't be able to be applied to carbon markets, but as everybody else just said, it's developing. There's some things that need to be worked out with it, and I think that in the coming years it'll be something that there's some potential for farmers to realize additional revenue from this, and that would be in addition to these reduced costs that we demonstrated today.
Oh, well, okay. Thanks, Archie. And thanks, Will, Zeb, and Robbie. I appreciate your input. I hung in there. It's been a good session. I always enjoy talking soil health, especially with producers that are making it happen. And Will, I just compliment you on a great program. I sense from Zeb and Robbie, they've got a lot of good information from you over the years, and we appreciate that. And with that, I'm going to bring this one to a close. We covered about all, and I appreciate it. And one thing I do want to remind folks, there will be a survey. Please take the time to participate in that. And the second thing is, for those that you might know some folks that wanted to tune in and weren't able to, there will be, this is going to be made, a replay of this is going to be made available off of the Soil Health Institute's YouTube page sometime next week. And you can also view the previous 5 webinars that were done earlier. So with that, thanks a lot and have a good day.